Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee Larson, and y'all, guess who I brought into the studio? It's Heather White, our author here in Montana. Welcome.
Hi. Hi, everybody. So excited to be here, Lee. Thank you.
Folks, if you haven't heard of Heather White, you're going to now. She's down in Bozeman, Montana, and she has been working on books. She's been an author of at least 3 books about sustainability, um, eco-friendly practices, but also eco-anxiety. A lot of us are stressing about the future of our world, whether you're here in Montana and you're a farmer, or you're worried about water and AI. There is a lot of stuff that I know I have talked about with my therapist, and I'm so glad someone is naming that. Heather, tell us, how did you get into environmental or sustainable advocacy? Were you an outdoorsy kid growing up?
Absolutely, Lee. And thank you so much for having me on. As you know, my mom is a huge fan. And when she found out that I was coming on the podcast, I think she's really thought that she thinks I've made it. So thank you for the opportunity for me to be able to brag to my mom. And thank you for your work. But I grew up in East Tennessee, right near the base of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And I just think when you're in beautiful environments like that, you can't help but be someone who's focused on conservation and the environment. And my earliest childhood memories are hiking and camping with my parents and spending time outdoors. And I think that that experience connecting to nature really created a lifelong conservation ethic for me. And so that's what I attribute my passion for all this work about sustainability, conservation, helping people understand how young people especially feel about the future of the planet and the future that we're leaving them. And that's one of my big calls to action. And really, my purpose is to help people realize that everyone who cares about the future can be an environmentalist, even though that's kind of a loaded word for a lot of people. I think it's something you should feel comfortable saying.
Yes, absolutely. It's certainly a loaded word. I listened to someone the other day talk about how the environmental terrorists have taken California hostage, and I was like, imagine that is a
Yeah.
phrase.
Yeah. That's
um,
quite a phrase. Quite a phrase.
but I want to say hi to Heather's mom. You've raised a
Yay.
wonderful daughter. I also am familiar with Eastern Tennessee, the Great Smoky Mountains. Last spring, some of my audience knows I've written children's books about my dog visiting national parks and teaching kids how to, recreate responsibly and what that looks like out in nature. And I mean, my goodness, that area is gorgeous and with so many resources. And um, something I noticed that you get out of Great Smoky Mountains National Park and you immediately hit Cherokee, North Carolina on that side is and thinking about the relocation of the Native Americans from that area to Oklahoma and east. I mean that's environmental terrorism. That is their home. And I think about how so many policies in America have also always been to get natural resources, but then demonize us as environmental terrorists. Have you, in your work, I see that you've been on Good Morning America. You've had your TED Talks. Uh, and something that really has also stuck out is your work with Al Gore and Feingold years ago. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I've always loved in environment and politics. And I had the opportunity after I graduated from law school at the University of Tennessee to join the Gore campaign in 2000. And this was the election where he was running for president. Obviously, it didn't turn out the way that I had hoped. 537 votes made all the difference. And I ended up being a recount lawyer for Al Gore and then moving to DC and ultimately worked for Russ Feingold, which is really interesting because Feingold is such a champion when it comes to conservation and the environment. But he also was the leader of the McCain Feingold campaign finance bill, which of course was overturned by Citizens United. He was the lone member of the Senate and maybe even the Congress, but I know in the Senate to vote against the Patriot Act. And he also voted against the creation of the Department of Homeland Security because he was really worried about the future of a police state. So I'm just so proud that I worked for Al and I worked for Russ. They were just really great leaders. And they, of course, the through line is their conservation ethic and their the fact that they're champions for public lands and wild places. But one of the things you just said, Lee, that I think we should really talk about is kind of this reckoning that we're having with our history. And when you talked about going to Cherokee, North Carolina, and thinking about the Trail of Tears, and thinking about Native Americans who, owned the land that European settlers laid claim to, that is an important part of our history that we have to acknowledge and not run away from. And this administration, as you probably know, is instructing the National Park Service to take down exhibits that talk about Native connections to different parks, including here in Glacier, which like we have the Flathead Indian Reservation so close by, and the Blackfeet are also connected, of course, to Glacier, but trying to take down exhibits and education about that. So one of the things that I think that you do such a good job with in all of your podcasts is help people connect the dots. All of this is related. The explosive language about eco terrorists in California, when really it's people are just saying, let's make sure that we manage our water and think about the energy that we produce and protect clean air and have access to public lands and connect to nature. How we use these terms is connected to everything from the Department of Homeland Security being created to the Wilderness Act being supported to clean energy and to reckoning with our history. So thank you for helping people connect the dots. And I think that experience that I had in political campaigns and working on Capitol Hill helped me understand that everything is political, from the food that we eat, from the quality of our air to the quality of the water that we drink to the access we have to nature. It doesn't have to be partisan, but it is always political, and that's something that's also been an important part of my work and my advocacy.
It absolutely is all political, like you said, doesn't have to be partisan, but that's how things get done. Like that folks like find a different way to phrase that. Like maybe you don't like divisiveness, you don't like partisan, that's fair, but everything is political. Even when you're talking about Feingold, how he cares deeply about conservation efforts and also against DHS, Department of Homeland Security. Again, everything is connected. I went down to the border of Arizona and Mexico probably a year and a half ago and talked to Sierra Club about the wall and how it's hurting wildlife migration. And it's again, Feingold could have called that, you know what I mean? Like if he didn't, at the time, because that's exactly, again, it's all this like a dominionism. I can do whatever I want and treat people however I want, and it's fine because I worship the right God or the right people, and it's twisted because now we're having real eco impacts of our immigration policies on conservation. Um, how how when you talk with your friends, your peers, all this anxiety that's coming out, you call it eco anxiety. Can you speak a little bit about how we can navigate some of these massive interconnected things,
That's such a good
ideas?
question, Lee. Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think that when I started this research about 5 years ago on eco anxiety, which is the mental health impacts of the climate crisis, the American Psychological Association defines it as a chronic fear of environmental doom. The Oxford English Dictionary only defined the term in 2021, which is unease or apprehension about the future of the environment because of our energy choices that are driving global warming. I think it's a lot bigger than that now. When I started writing this, I was thinking about young people, especially dealing with extreme weather, whether it be drought that we're experiencing. We finally got some snow in Bozeman today, thank goodness. But, whether it be the droughts people are experiencing, floods, hurricanes, I was thinking about really the impacts of climate specifically. But now that we're talking about democracy, the rise of authoritarianism, we're seeing such significant income inequality, racial injustice. It is really eco anxiety, in my view, is a anxiety about the future. What will the future look like? And the ways to cope, there's several different ways to cope, but one of the first things you need to do is kind of name how you're feeling and feel all the feels. I think when people start to peel back the layers, which I think you do such a good job of helping people understand what's happening, I think you can't unsee it. You can't unsee the injustice when you learn about the Trail of Tears, when you learn about Indian boarding schools. You can't unsee it. You can't unsee it when look at the provision in our Constitution that says that enslaved people are three-fifths a person, and that's how we're going to determine the calculus for how many members of Congress each state has, from in the House of Representatives. I mean, that's embedded in our Constitution. You can't unsee it. And so I think you have to first acknowledge it. And then I have such a simple philosophy, but that you have to exercise agency over this really large issue by doing one thing each day. And I call it a one green thing. I know it seems very simple, but I found that if you have a daily practice of sustainability or a daily practice of doing whatever you think you need to do to exercise agency over the issue you care about the most, it can help ease your anxiety. And I think the most important thing that we forget to talk about in the environmental movement is that your individual behavior change shifts culture. And we have to have culture change in order for big climate policy solutions to scale. Because I love policy. I love nerding out about different proposals and legislative ideas and possibilities. But we saw with the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the biggest piece of climate legislation ever, $600 billion for climate solutions. If we don't have the culture change where people accept it, demand it, they want the tax credits for the clean energy cars, they want the tax credit to convert their fleets to, electric cars, what have you. If we don't have that culture change, the policy won't work. And that's also one more reason why what you're doing so importantly is you're helping shift culture by having these conversations, by inviting people to think differently, to letting people know it's okay to change their mind, helping them understand how their faith is being challenged right now with the current administration, and that there's a path and an off-ramp to shift directions and to say that compassion and kindness and caring for each other is really the way forward. And that's how we're going to get through this.
I'm so glad you brought up faith as well, because I know that you speak to faith groups, particularly in creation care. Can you talk a little bit about the response that you're getting working with faith leaders and communities?
Oh, thank you for that, Lee. Yeah, this is a big topic for the faith community, and it's mostly driven by young people in their congregation. We know just generally across different faiths, young people are kind of opting out of these, um, a lot of these organized religions. And when they do come forward, they are talking about their fear for what the planet is going to look like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so creation care is just this fundamental idea. It's in the Judeo-Christian philosophy that part of our job is to take care of God's creation. It's that simple. It's not just an extraction of natural resources. That's not why God created this earth, but that our job is also to take care of it. And what I'm finding is that older members of the congregation are having really difficult conversations with young people, young adults, maybe in their mid-20s, early 30s, who are saying to their parents or grandparents, we don't want to have kids because of climate. We don't want to bring in other humans to this world right now because we're so uncertain about what it's going to be like. And I think that's a wake-up call for a lot of people, no matter your faith. It's almost like a referendum on the world that we're leaving to the next generation. And so I'm finding that, a deep sense of faith and care and a want for action and to push for clean energy and climate solutions, but also a way to help young people see their role in different faith movements and how environmental stewardship is an important part of that.
And it's a huge part because on last April I had the opportunity to go to a Christian conference in Knoxville, actually.
Huh,
So
that's where I was born. Go Vols, go
yeah.
Vols, go Vols.
And in fact, that's what brought me and also helped me with that Great Smoky Mountains National Park trip. But um, and I watched, and there was a woman who identifies as a Baptist Christian woman and very devoted in her faith. But she doesn't use the word climate change. Like she won't use sustainability because she's found it's too left for her audience to click with it. And I thought that was, and so she spent the rest, she spoke to, she just didn't use climate change. She used all the other words. She used a ton of scripture. And then by the end of it, people were like, yeah, she's got a point. Maybe it's not. And I was sitting there, like my mind was blown. And I realized that there is a core audience here, that if, unless you're quoting scripture, nope, you're just an intellectual elitist, or, a tree hugging Democrat or whatever. Um, and I've been finding that, like, there are, like, faith leaders, if you word it in a certain way, can become some of our best advocates. Um, but now we've got to deal with the politicization of language.
We do, and I think, what you're so helpful helping many of us understand is that we've gotta trust the people on the ground. If she says that we can get to the same outcome, but we don't use the word climate change, maybe it's clean energy, maybe we talk about being an awesome ancestor, maybe we talk about stewardship and or maybe it's just conservation, then let's go with it if we get the end result. Let's not worry too much about how we are talking about it as long as the threat is very clear and the solution is clear and we can agree to the solution. I think the challenge becomes um, thinking something's more political than it is. We know globally 89% of people want climate action. And according to the Yale Center for Climate Communications, 4% of Americans, 64% of Americans want strong climate action. What's interesting to me is that that's also the polling of people who think this administration is not doing a good job, 64%. And in my world, a lot of people who voted for this president, and as I said, I'm from, I'm in Montana, I'm from East Tennessee. I know a lot of people who voted for this president that are not happy with what's happening. They're not okay with what's happening. It doesn't mean that they're, doing Instagram reels or going on podcasts to leave, but they're not happy. So that's actually 64% is a big group. For Americans to all agree on something at 64% is actually pretty substantial. And I think that that's something for us not to be too afraid to use the words, but you know your people, and we got to trust the people on the ground. And if we can get to the right end result, I'm not as worried about the language as I am about how we move forward.
And you're absolutely, I mean, this administration went pretty hard after public lands. No, that is, if there is one thing that Montanans agree on, it's the public lands. And so finding that people, gun-loving, hunting type folk are pushing back saying, "What do you mean you're about to sell off some of that land that I hunt every fall?"
It
And, I'm
made
seeing it up here in Great Falls. I know you're seeing it down
Oh,
there in
yeah.
Bozeman.
It made so many people really angry, the selling off of public lands, and then when our congressional delegation said one member said, "This is my San Juan Hill. I'm not gonna let this happen." It's hard to give people credit for not selling off public lands. Do you know what like, that's not being a champion. Not selling it off when you helped the people in power who were trying to get us to sell public lands, if you enabled them and you stopped them from selling it, that's not like heroic in my view. That's like baseline, especially here in Montana. And I think also, clean air, clean water, these are political winners. Clean air, clean water are political winners. Access to nature, no matter your political point of view, your religious background, most people think kids should probably spend a little bit more time outside playing and less time connected to social media or computers or video games or what have you. And the research, of course, backs that up. So these are actually really important values that I feel like the current administration has lost its way as it has embraced this authoritarianism and this whole like comply as opposed to don't tread on me, which you and I know this is how the majority of people, no matter their political point of view here in Montana, are like, don't tread on me. I mean, pretty much everyone I know owns a gun, no matter their political point of view here. It's so strange. I can't really, it's still hard to reckon with the authoritarianism. Like, for example, Lee, I'm finding that I am reading, citing, and sharing the Cato Institute. which you would
Right.
think, given my political background working for Al Gore and Russ Feingold, you wouldn't think that like Cato would be my go-to, but this is a libertarian conservative group that is saying due process of law is important. The Second Amendment is important for all people, no longer, no censorship. The 10th Amendment is really important. States' rights is important. The federal government shouldn't be overreaching. So it's just a really strange time for all of us, I think, as we navigate our way forward.
And I'm certainly laughing because I had that exact thought this morning. I was like, "Cato made a point." And I was like, "Do I share?" And I was like, "I don't know."
Totally sharing. And they've done this big analysis that, for example, with immigration, which anyone who does climate knows that a humane immigration policy is so important for our shared future because we're all of us are more likely to be a climate refugee than a billionaire. Even if you have $100 million in your bank account, which I'm gonna go out on a limb, Lee, and think maybe that's not you, I know that's not me. Even if you have $100 million, you're still more likely to be a climate refugee than a billionaire. You're so far away from being a billionaire. And so we have to think about immigration, globally, but we have to understand that we're going to see a lot of movement within the United States and outside the United States because of this extreme weather that we have been experiencing and we will continue to experience if we don't move quickly to a clean energy future.
Absolutely.
But Cato
Yeah,
Cato did a great report showing that undocumented people actually contribute more to the economy and use our government services less than American citizens. Like, they're just doing some really, really important research right now.
absolutely, and, it's just so blatantly unethical. I am really struggling with, the visuals coming out of Minnesota, and yes, that's specifically related to ICE and immigration, and also the videos coming out where all of us in the last year watched the floods in Asheville, we watched the wildfires in California, and we just sat and then last night,
The
there was
floods
a
in
girl
Texas.
crying because yeah,
Yeah, sorry,
like,
but you were saying about last night, but the floods in Texas, I was thinking that
and
you were.
yeah, the floods in Texas
Yeah.
too, and we're watching these
And what
and in
happened last night?
horror.
I'm sorry, you were gonna do an
Yeah,
example from last
wood
night.
it's a town in Oklahoma caught fire because it's so dry. Um, and it just you just sat watching, and the wind is real bad in Oklahoma, and that's the other thing, you got the wind. Um, this past summer, I had the opportunity to go, on behalf of a faith community to Pakistan or Pakistan for my Pakistani followers, but I did a couple of things. I was mainly working with women and girls and women's rights over there, but I did have the opportunity to spend a week up in the Himalayas working with folks on climate change and how they're incorporating climate change into their grade school curriculum. Because kids need to know they're trying to start priming that so kids know that that is a problem they need to be solving and looking at. And it was just I remember talking to someone up there, and for those who may not know about what Himalayan was going on over there, Himalayas are massive. I mean, we're talking 20,000 feet plus average. Mount Denali over in Alaska is something like 18 or 20,000 feet. So that's the tallest in North America. That's the average over there in the Himalayas. They're all grouped together. A lot of snow, a lot of ice, and all that snow and ice is melting rapidly, causing horrific flooding. But also, the terrain that builds the mountains is a mixture of water and ice and rock. And so it's creating landslides and I mean, devastation like you haven't seen it. So I remember I was there, and then the weekend I got back were the Texas floods when the girls' summer camp. And I just sat there looking I had just spent a whole week working with refugees there, and now I'm looking at white, rich refugees. And they'll have means, they'll find another way, but it's happening to both. This is like nature does not discriminate based on your bank account. And, so I wanted to thank you for bringing that up because uh, it's global. We're watching this global.
It is, and what a remarkable experience, Lee, to go to Pakistan and see the impacts. And all of us are experiencing climate change in real time. I know one of the things that I write about in my books is, the importance of this daily practice of doing one thing each day connected to conservation and sustainability. But I also say have your Go kit ready. And I know I have a Go kit. I also have the Red Cross has been telling us to do this for years, but I've memorized all of the phone numbers that are important to me. That's like a really big thing to do is memorize your loved one's phone numbers if you don't have access to your cell phone. Make sure that you're ready to go, whether it's fires or floods or extreme heat or extreme snow. I mean, it's been it's been a lot the last couple of years. And one of the things that I hear a lot from folks is that these issues are so overwhelming. And yeah, you're telling me to do one thing a day, Heather, thanks a lot. You but where do I start? And so, what I have in my book, Eco Anxiety, here, which I do want to point out was last year's best local book in Bozeman. And I'm Bozeman's favorite local author from the Bozeman Choice Awards. But Eco Anxiety, I have an assessment. It's available at the nonprofit I run, onegreenthing.org. It's a 5-minute online quiz, and it asks this question: who are you in service? How do you show up for the people you love? And I have 7 different archetypes based on what your interests are. And then I match you to a daily practice of sustainability based on how you show up for your friends. Like, for example, are you the person who would like show up at Lee's door and say, we're going to get you out of here. We got to go for a walk. Like that's, an adventurer who likes to take people outside of their comfort zones, who takes a lot of calculated risks. There's also the sage that is focused on the spiritual connection to nature. So you might be the friend who's like, hey, I'd like for you to read, this scripture or check out this poem, or here's a really beautiful piece of music that I think might help you feel better. That's the sage. So there's 7 different archetypes, but based on how you show up for the people you love, I then match you to this daily practice. It's a 7-day plan. I have a 21-day plan, almost like a fitness book or a self-help book, Lee, in Eco Anxiety. But it's just this idea of um, trying to not take control because we're not in control, but taking action that can help you're doing what you can with what you have to make a difference, and knowing that we're all culture change agents in our families and in our communities. We are. Like you listening to this podcast, sharing it with a friend, that is helping to drive culture change as people, hear Lee's perspective, her guests, and start to just think about all of these current events in a broader context.
And you lay it out and like you said, you have your daily step, what's one thing a day, but you also talk about something called green your eating. Can you talk a little bit? What is
Yeah.
greening your eating?
Yeah, I think that's, again, to this idea that everything is political, just starting to think about where your food comes from, how it's grown, who grows it. We know that extreme heat is making a huge impact on farm workers. So thinking about that, not to mention the immigration aspects of farming. There was also an article 2 years ago in the Billings Gazette based on a study at MSU where ranchers here in Montana are experiencing climate anxiety because of the extreme weather that they're experiencing. Greening your eating is just being more aware of where your food is grown, and just also encouraging you to think about more plant-based options because we do know that, of course in Montana we love our meat, but having maybe less, thinking of it more of a condiment and not the main every night, thinking about meatless Mondays, just being more mindful of the impact of the food that you're eating and how it what impact it has on the planet. The other thing that I'm just really excited about here in Bozeman is that we just got community-wide composting, but being mindful of food waste. So I don't have to do my Laura Ingalls Wilder compost bin in the backyard, which I've been doing for years. In the winter, it's frozen solid. So now we have community composting here, but just being mindful of, I know it sounds like this is like the least sexy climate solution ever, Lee, but manage your leftovers, meal plan, think about how you're going to reduce food waste because actually food waste contributes 8% of global carbon emissions. And so just that simple fact of budgeting and the simple act of food planning can make a big difference in your waste.
And it's so heartbreaking to hear about, like you said, 8% of food waste. Meanwhile, we have in the United States food deserts where people do not have access. Um, to healthy food options, fresh food options. And again, it just all comes down to our policies,
It
um,
does.
and 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 um, and
It
how that
does.
works.
And then, Lee, I have to tell you my favorite One Green thing. And it's not for everybody, but my favorite One Green thing, and I don't do it every day, but it's pretty much every other day, is I call 202-224-3121, which is the congressional switchboard. And I talk to my Montana delegation and tell them what I'm thinking about, whatever the headline is. Often it's about conservation and climate, but obviously I've been talking a lot about immigration and what's happening in Minneapolis. And here's the thing that I think is important, because generally our delegation does not agree with my point of view. And I know that. I'm always really professional when I call, but I also record it because I think it's important for us to understand in this authoritarian experience we're living through, the right to memory is important because it's under attack. We talked a little bit about this idea of these exhibits coming down in the National Park Service. Um, but the right to memory is important, and we need to record when we're calling our members of Congress. And when I say record, I mean I don't literally record it. I just write down that I called and what about. So we know when our elected officials say they had no idea that atrocities were happening in these detention centers, or they didn't understand that due process was being violated by masked federal agents in our cities that are getting paid $100,000 a year. We have receipts. We have records that we called them. And even if we didn't talk to them, we talked to their staff. And so I think it's important to understand that it's not just that you're trying to change their mind, which sometimes you can. I mean, they do keep a track of who's for or against different issues. Sometimes you can move the needle, but even if you're not going to move the needle, you're holding them accountable because they can't say they didn't know. And I think, Lee, in a year from now, we're going to hear a lot of people that say they had no idea. They had no idea.
Oh,
They
yeah,
just didn't.
right. I had no idea, and then, oh, it was in the stress and chaos of the government shutdowns, like, they'll find something, but, right to memory is exactly what is under threat because the
Yeah.
gaslighting is so bad.
It's shocking. It's shocking. It's really shocking. And intentional. And intentional. And that's why community is important. That's why using your voice is important. That's why it doesn't have to be an Instagram reel. You can just talk to your friends about, hey, this doesn't seem right. I'm not okay with people being shot 8 times by federal officers and no one's been held accountable. That's just Alex Preddy. I'm not even mentioning Renee Good, not to mention the 30 plus other people who've been killed in ICE custody, uh, that we still don't understand what's happening. So it's I do believe that 30 years from now, people will ask, what side are you on? You know, what side were you on? And that it's important for you to have these conversations, because if we don't all speak out in our own way, and everybody has a different way, we will be viewed as complicit. And Lee, it's really bad. Now, that said, this is where, like, my kids are like, I can't believe people invite you to speak, Mom. But you're like, it's so bad, and you're not even talking about climate. You're just talking about democracy. How do you even go to cocktail parties? I don't understand. Um,
Right?
I still I not only have hope, I know that we are going to get through this, because authoritarianism in the United States is not popular. We know that from the polls. It does not poll well. This is not what people want. And, election security, we're hearing a lot about that. And we're hearing about efforts to suppress the vote, veiled as preventing election fraud, when it's actually just really people getting scared that are in power. But in my view, Lee, and I'd love to know your thoughts, I think all of this oppression, this censorship, you can't see this person on Stephen Colbert. We think that you might cheat at the elections. You have to bring 12 forms of ID in order to vote. I think it has a
It's absurd.
reverse effect. Like, the people I talk about are like, fine, I'll walk 10 miles if I need to on election day. I'll bring every single piece of paper I have with my identity. I feel like it's really, lack of a better word, Lee, pissing people off. And I think more and more people are actually getting engaged rather than being turned off. What are your
And
thoughts?
especially I believe that too, and I also think that as this continues, and they start seeing consequences of their own or whatever, it's no longer about owning the libs when it's affecting your Medicaid or your hunting area or something, right? But I'm also seeing not only is it pushing back against specifically a very extreme group in our politics, um, but just where we are too, earlier in this talk, you and I talked about the politicization of language, and it's also a lot of people are just getting different. Like I have noticed even on my side, I'm not getting as much hate or critique on the left if I accidentally misspeak or, something. And I'm seeing people like soften on that side. I'm seeing people on the right soften, and then I'm seeing a lot more better conversation about the economy and public lands, like coming back to those things we can agree on that aren't necessarily as, it's not faith and tribal or it's not race or gender. It's this and that should concern the leaders because like a lot of us aren't going to agree on social issues, but if we come together over public lands and the economy and class, like because again, we talk about the mining, over whether it's in Tennessee, Appalachia, or here in Montana, and what it's done to the rivers and hunting and uh, people having medical problems. Like you can only hate the tree hugging hippies for so long until maybe you realize they were actually fighting for you. And so yeah, it's a really cool to see how the pushback is also kind of shaping the way all of us are recongregating and what hills that we're willing to die on, maybe that we were willing to die on it 2 years ago, but there are bigger problems now. And so allyship has also changed too. Um, so it's certainly a weird I've even had that thought, like, is this administration about to trigger a social revolution, like a socialist revolution? Because it's if there are people are mad. And so yeah, those are my just off the cuff um, thoughts.
I
I
love that allyship is looking differently now, and I think that's when we do see big social movements is when unlikely groups start to band together and
yes.
say, "Enough is enough. This is not what we want." We believe in due process, we believe in the Bill of Rights, we believe in what we were promised, even if our history shows we haven't lived up to it. We believe in that, and, what was once what was once a litmus test is no longer a litmus test because everything that we really care about is so under attack right now. So I think that we are going to get out of this. I think we're going to start looking at things like healthcare a lot differently. The subsidies are gone. Right, and that hasn't really been in the news lately, but people are getting hit hard. It's the number one reason for bankruptcies. I think we're gonna see a bigger push for if it's not universal healthcare, just more support for healthcare. I don't think, a $1,500 tax credit is gonna suffice for most people, in healthcare. I think we're going definitely around public lands and access to public lands, and I think also the miscalculation in Minneapolis is going to have long-term effects, and that miscalculation was this idea that people would be triggered to be violent, and instead, it's been nonviolent and community-based resistance, and I think, there's an article in The Atlantic that I haven't read yet, Lee, that's supposed to be amazing about how the administration was shocked that compassion like, they underestimated compassion and how community stands up for each other. And I think, that's what I learned in Vacation Bible School. That is what I learned in Vacation Bible School is the importance of compassion and being there for each other and taking care of those in need. And seeing that lesson's going to stick with us for a long time and I think inspire a lot of other communities. And I'm pretty excited that that might be why people start changing their views on what is aligned with their values and what isn't. Like people standing up for each other like they did in Minneapolis and are
And
today.
you
Just to be clear, it's still happening. They are today.
yes, yes. And I'm glad you bring that up because talking about unlikely bedfellows, essentially. Because when you look at Project 2025, when you look at the Heritage Foundation and the coalition that they have formed, it is a lot of unlikely bedfellows. It's folks that, like, uh really in turn even in like the religious side, their different theologies compete with one another, and maybe they're tolerating each other right now, but if it came to a point of power, they definitely fight over that, right? We're seeing Pete Hegseth, very evangelical Calvinist, and then JD Vance, very conservative Catholic. So it is kind of interesting that I'm like, hold on, you guys have already fought a war like, before.
Right.
but but like that is one thing that I've noticed, like it's the religious right has expanded by pulling people into the fold that had a single, vested interest, and I really hope that more folks on the left, like, see that is how you get things done. It's how they're winning, and if we're gonna compete or push back, like, we've gotta do it too.
Lee, that's
And
such a good point. There is an article in the New Yorker by Charles Duhigg that talks about mothers against drunk driving, and he compares that to the Just Say No campaign, the Dare campaign, and he looks at how Republicans and Democrats organize by looking at these two philosophies. So what MAD did is we are against drunk driving nationally. You, wherever you are localized, wherever you are organized locally, you figure out what that means to you. Does that mean, you're going to hold bars liable? Does that mean public education campaign? Does that mean laws, local ordinances? You decide what works for your community. And the DARE campaign was a national campaign that was a lot of PR events and big rallies that a lot of people organized, but it didn't really have that grassroots connection on the Just Say No to drugs. I mean, it had great ad council campaigns and a catchy slogan, but didn't have a lot of organized grassroots activism based. And he makes this. Duhigg says that that's very similar to the Democrats' national strategy of a tightly controlled message that's super centralized. We'll have big events everywhere, and we'll bring lots of people in and get them excited. But there isn't necessarily a local connection. Whereas Republicans have been, interestingly enough, I wouldn't ever use the term inclusive given this administration, but actually, all you have to do right now is wear the red hat in that context. This is based on that article. That's not necessarily my point of view, but like everyone can come in and you can define it in the way that works for you. And I thought that was just a really interesting take on how we have to let more people in. We have to give people an off ramp to say, this administration is not what I voted for or not, doesn't align with my values. Here's a judgment free zone where you can be part of whatever that opposition is. And then here's what we're going to offer you. Here's what this new world, this new vision could look like. I think there's a lot that we can learn from that organizing, just like you were saying. And I've had many friends ask me, well, where's the Democrats' Project 2026, 2028? And I'm like, oh, there's like 15 to 100 of them. Like every special interest group has one. Like I helped that with the Obama transition. I did for the green groups who did environment conservation. We just don't have one unifying group that says it's all here because everyone has a very particular point of view. So to your point about all these different alignments that they had was really powerful for there to be one document, because there's plenty of documents for the Democratic Party. There's just, at least 100 of them.
oh, yeah. No, and that's a good point, is that the fracturing on the left is certainly hurting us, and that is one thing that, we can just take away from. If you fracture enough, you lose entirely, and it's not to say that the reasons for fracturing aren't valid or that the disagreements. It's to say, like, at some point, we do have to find a way of being in community, because this is all of us.
Yeah,
Um,
and to your point of like not hearing as much chatter or critique, I think people understand that the threat is so severe that we all just are in this together. We can figure out the details of the policy later. And I think that's another interesting point, Lee, of like making sure that we talk about the message and the policy separately. Because I feel like my point of view is that we need absolute moral clarity on ICE, that mass federal agents kidnapping people without due process of law, taking them across state lines when they haven't committed a crime is not okay. Then we can talk about what does that look like? Does the agency go or not go? my view, it should. But, like, we can talk about those policies, but we need leaders with absolute moral clarity right now,
Yeah,
and when we start talking about the policies first, people just get confused.
absolutely. And also, like you said, policies can confuse people. They can become too divisive, um, and it's also it's hard to maintain, that hope when you start writing things down and institutionalizing things. But like you said, everything is political. This is how things get done, and um, and it's through conversations like this that we're like, okay, like it's all connected, and the support, making sure that you're vocal about it. I didn't know that article about how the administration was surprised or shocked by the compassion coming out of Minnesota, but it doesn't surprise me, particularly when you run an administration based on fear and blackmail, extortion, control, and that's how you see the world. Um, it's a real concern. Even watching the Olympics last night, I was thinking, how many Winter Olympics do we get? And those who get to participate in the Winter Olympics will have to have come from well off or well established countries, because it's just getting harder and harder. And I hate that. I love the Winter Olympics, Heather. Like, I think it is very fun, and I love
It's
competition. And
so it's as I have to say, it is so hard to watch as an older person because it's terrifying. There's really not an event, maybe curling. Curling, they don't risk their lives, but pretty much every other single event, people are risking their life. The bobsled, the skeleton is insane. Oh my gosh, when I saw Lindsey Vonn in that accident and she was just, helicoptered by like a cord, the helicopter couldn't land. So there was like this cord and a guy with like a rappelling harness, and then her in this, I don't know, like this, it looked like a sleeping bag being suspended from the helicopter off the ski slopes. It's just, yeah, it's thrilling and terrifying to watch the Olympics.
terrifying, and then
Exactly.
on your
Exactly.
I was looking ahead to see what the future Winter Olympics were, and, it was like Salt Lake, I think there was back in Switzerland, but it's basically just gonna go back and forth between the Rockies and the Alps
Yeah,
for
and
a
we'll
while.
see
I
what the
don't
snowpack is like. Yeah, I mean, it is going to be it's gonna be a challenge for sure with our warming climate. It is, and the more extremes that we have too. It's not just warming, it's also the more extremes that we have in the weather because of climate. And
Right.
it's a real issue. And the other thing that you mentioned too about this administration and, everything's political. And everything is political, but it doesn't have to be partisan. And I think a good example of that is the Epstein files and what we're seeing with Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna. That bipartisanship and
Yep.
Nancy Mace and Margie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, um, they have made it possible for a lot more transparency to happen. And that would not happen without people working across the aisles. So we know, and you would think that this would be an issue that the whole world would see as a moral obligation for us to uncover and prosecute, no matter who's involved. And it seems like the wealthiest, most influential people in the world are involved. But I think that bipartisanship and the consistency, like Thomas Massey, I disagree with on a policy perspective on 90% of the time. He's very consistent with his policies, but he is fearless in getting to the truth of this, just horrific situation. And that partnership between Ro Khanna and him is something that I think many years from now we're going to look at and see that leadership, it still exists. Bipartisanship still exists, and that's the only way through.
Absolutely, yes. And I hope that that comes out too, whether it's something like the Epi files or public lands and healthcare. Um, Particularly when you start rolling back environmental regulations, you start sending in laborers, like you're looking at lung reproductive cancer, like it's gonna be a nightmare here in about 10, 15 years, just like we've seen with Appalachia in the water. I mean, I've read y'all's stories, and it's amazing how far bad actors will go to cover up things despite real medical data happening in the community.
It's pretty
I can all
shocking. I think also people, who are younger don't remember what things looked like in the 1970s, like before EPA was created in 1970. So in the late 60s, my mom went to the University of Tennessee, and she remembers having to put her car lights on and windshield wipers in the middle of the day because of all of the soot from the coal-fired plants. She could smell the creeks on her walking to campus because there was so much pollution just going right into the waterways. The companies didn't decide to clean up their act because they were good stewards of our land. They were required to, and they were sued. And so I think this endangerment finding last week, the EPA decided to rescind a finding that they made 20 years ago, that under the Clean Air Act, greenhouse gas emissions could be regulated. And the Supreme Court actually upheld EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act that was created in the 1970s. And this administration repealed that and said, we're not going to regulate greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act, which is just, obviously it's a huge threat to public health. It's going to accelerate global warming, but also, Lee, it's just silly. It's just silly. These companies have already made these investments in technology for clean energy. Like, why would they just scrap it now? Also, almost all the companies that operate here on a big energy scale are global. They have to meet requirements in Europe and other countries for clean energy. So why, like, it's almost like owning the libs to just hurt everybody. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm not saying that there could be, I'm sure there's more regulations that could be more efficient. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but clean air and clean water, and to your point about worker protections, it's so important, and it's all connected. I mean, black lung, we're still paying for coal miners to get health care because of black lung. There's a black lung fund that the United States pays for because of the impacts on worker health. And, as you noted, Aaron Brockovich wrote the intro to my book, and I worked with Aaron to try to shed light on the largest male breast cancer cluster in the world. Largest male breast cancer cluster in the world. At the time, there were 82 men. Their only connection was that they were on Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. They weren't all Marines. Some of them were kids of Marines, or they were contractors, or they owned a shop, on base. But that was their connection. And it turns out that there was perchlorate contamination that the DoD covered up for years, and we fought to try to get medical monitoring. There's a lot of lawsuits there, but if our federal government's going to cover up water contamination that impacts workers, for-profit companies are going to do it too, right? Which is
Right.
why we have to have strong oversight and strong regulation to protect people's health.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a fascinating bit about the military,
Yeah.
and male breast cancer, and definitely gonna be following up on that because that's exactly who it hurts. You're
Yeah,
not
and
owning the
again,
libs
Lee,
when you hurt.
like my kids are like, "Wow, mom, that's great. Great conversation starter." No, but it's important to tell these stories. It's important to tell these stories and get people relief and people coming together across the political spectrum to say this is wrong. We can do that. We can still do that. Even now, we can still do that. Even with the polarization, we can all work together.
Well, I want you to I mean, where can folks read your book? How can they follow how can they learn more about you? This whole hour has been fantastic, and I know my listeners are gonna wanna follow up, and especially on your 60 day,
Oh,
your
thank you.
one a day.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
can you
I have 3 books. The first is called One Green Thing, that came out in 2022, Discover Your Hidden Power to Help Save the Planet. Then I have 60 Days to a Greener Life. These are all published by HarperCollins. And this book is a little bit like a daily devotional, Lee, which I know you know what a daily devotional is, but basically every chapter is a day. There's 60 chapters, 450 words. And here, Lee, just pick a number 1 through 60, just any number.
33.
Okay, so I'm going to go to day 33, get to know your watershed. So I tell you like why you should know what a watershed is, what you should understand about challenges to watersheds, and where you can find more information. So just a quick little quick little chapter there for you to do one thing each day. And then the paperback version of One Green Thing came out last fall, and it's Eco Anxiety, Saving Our Sanity, Our Kids, and Our Future. And every book has this link to find out what your service superpower is, and there's a plan for you to take action. There's a lot of journal entries and reflection for what type of future do we want to create. Because I think that was where I would kind of end, Lee, is that right now these are really tough times, but the future doesn't just happen to us. We get to decide what happens next. And so putting some of our energy forward to what does a healthier, greener, more just future look like? What does it feel like? What can we build together? I think is an important conversation that we need to have. I'd love to continue that with you, but I invite everybody who's listening to start thinking about what's possible as we push back against this authoritarianism, but to know that another world is waiting for us.
It absolutely is, and I have that feeling too, and just, like, even the way my body sensationally is responding to all that's coming out, there is something very unnatural, not honest, not true, like, we know that logically, but I mean, just, like, spiritually, I can feel and I'm like, "This can't last because it's not on truth." Like, it's just it's ego and power, and it's eventually gonna implode or explode, whatever it's gonna do, but the whole thing just feels sick, and we don't have to be defeated by that. Like we can choose whether it's one action a day or listening to this podcast or having you come speak. I'm sitting here thinking about other communities here in Great Falls. I'm like, oh yeah, that would be awesome. But folks, we do have power, and as long as we're able to continue coming together, um, when you talk about right to memory, write that stuff down, document things. You are not crazy, even though they're trying to make you feel that way. Um, but stay close to your pack. Uh, we'll get through this together. Heather, thank you so much for coming. You have been an absolute rock star of a guest. We have covered so much and so much that we didn't even get to cover. So yeah, I don't know if you can see my paper. You'll come back. I hope we can collaborate on something else in the future soon and when the weather gets a little better. Heather, you were called by Aaron Brockovich the Brene Brown of the environmental movement. Can you leave us with some parting words? Brene Brown of the
Oh,
environmental
sure. Well, I
movement.
think a lot of times when people start understanding the impact of climate and how stressed our ecosystems are, and I would say our communities too, there is shame and guilt that comes up. And I think it's important for everyone to know that we individually did not cause the situation that we're in, but we're all responsible for the solution, and that everyone is welcome and everyone is needed in this movement. And we all show up in different ways, and we show up with our different gifts and service. So that's kind of where what would leave everybody. I just want to say thank you so much, Lee, for the opportunity. It is so wonderful to connect with you. And I'm really appreciative of your work and what you do. And that, hope is active hope is really important. We get hope through action, but part of that action is through connection and connecting with each other in community. And thank you for creating such a vibrant, kind, compassionate community.
You. I got into a comment fight with someone and I was not so kind, so I appreciate that. But yes, and-
Advocacy. I'm going to change that.
Yeah.
That's advocacy.
And but yeah, can keep up the fight. I mean, that what amazing work that you have done, your books, your action. I love that you spend so much time on action because that is so much of the feeling of powerlessness, the shame. But be in community, be in action. Like that's how humans have overthrown and overcome things like this before. So, folks, that is Heather White. You can check her out on her website, heatherwhite.com. I mean, like I said before, she's a badass, and her books are really effective in helping shaping your mindset and giving you, again, that sense of agency. Um, what did you think? What did you think, guys? Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know kind of your thoughts. What did you learn from this podcast that you didn't know before? Did it impact you? I want to hear about it. Heather, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you.
Alrighty, folks, that's a wrap, and I'll see y'all next time on Follow the Leader. Bye. And stop.